I'm Jean Thompson, 63 years old, and I never thought my golden years would turn into a nightmare because of my own flesh and blood. When Catherine, my only daughter, showed up at my door with her husband Troy demanding I pay their $500,000 debt, I felt my heart shatter into a million pieces. I need the money tomorrow. She ordered, her voice cold and unfamiliar. I smiled and said, okay. But 4 hours later, I was at the airport with only one suitcase. If you're watching this from your phone or computer, please like and subscribe while I tell you how I reclaimed my life. Life has a funny way of teaching us lessons when we least expect them. My story begins long before that fateful day when my daughter demanded I empty my retirement accounts. I spent most of my adult life as a successful accountant at Wallace and Myers, a prestigious firm in Portland. My husband Richard and I built a modest but comfortable life together. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we managed our finances well and always had enough for what mattered. Everything changed when Richard suffered a sudden heart attack at 52. One minute we were planning a vacation to celebrate our 25th anniversary, and the next I was a widow at 45 with a 17-year-old daughter to raise alone. The loss devastated both of us, but Catherine took it especially hard. She had always been Daddy's little girl. After Richard's death, I made a conscious decision to prioritize Catherine over my career advancement. I turned down a partnership track position that would have required extensive travel and longer hours. Instead, I maintained my senior accountant role, which provided stability and allowed me to be home when Catherine needed me. With Richard's life insurance and careful budgeting, we maintained our middle-class lifestyle without major sacrifices. Mom, you don't have to come to every single event. Catherine would sometimes complain during her senior year of high school, embarrassed by my constant presence at her activities. But I could see the relief in her eyes when she spotted me in the audience during her debate competitions or theater performances. Those years were difficult but strengthened our bond. We became a team, just the two of us against the world. When Catherine was accepted to Westlake University, a private school known for its business program, I was both proud and concerned about the cost. The tuition was steep at $40,000 per year, but I wanted to give her every opportunity. I dipped into some of my personal savings and took on consulting work on weekends to make it happen without student loans. "You're investing in my future, Mom," Catherine told me when I dropped her off freshman year. "I promise I'll make it worth every penny." I believed her completely. During those college years, I started noticing subtle changes in my daughter. The humble, grateful girl I raised began transforming into someone more status conscious. She joined an expensive sorority and suddenly needed designer clothes to fit in with her new friends. Her calls home became less about sharing experiences and more about requesting additional funds for social activities or sorority dues. "Everyone's going to Cancun for spring break, Mom," she'd explain. "It's not just about fun, it's about networking with the right people." Reluctantly, I would transfer the money, telling myself this was part of her professional development. By her junior year, Catherine had developed expensive tastes that concerned me. When she came home for Christmas, she spent more time shopping than being with me. Her conversation revolved around brand names and which of her friends had wealthy parents. I tried talking to her about values and financial responsibility, but my words seemed to bounce off her. "You just don't understand how things work now, Mom." She'd dismiss me. "Success is about image and connections." It was during her senior year that Catherine met Troy Daniels at a business school function. He was 5 years older, already working at an investment firm, and exuded confidence. When she first brought him home, I was struck by his charisma and how he commanded attention in any room. He drove an expensive car, wore tailored suits, and spoke convincingly about his business acumen. "Troy's going to be a millionaire before he's 35, Catherine gushed. "His firm is already considering him for junior partner." Something about Troy made me uneasy from the start. Perhaps it was the way his eyes calculated everything around him, assigning value to objects rather than people. Or maybe it was how quickly he steered conversations toward money and status. When I mentioned my concerns to Catherine, she accused me of jealousy. "You just can't stand that I found someone successful," she snapped. "Not everyone wants to live a boring middle-class life like you and Dad did." Her words stung deeply, but I swallowed my hurt. I wanted to support her choices, even if I questioned them. 6 months after graduation, Catherine announced their engagement. Troy proposed with a diamond ring that must have cost at least 3 months of his salary. I wondered about the wisdom of such an expense for a young professional just starting his career, but kept my thoughts to myself. The wedding planning quickly spiraled into an exercise in extravagance. What I had envisioned as a meaningful ceremony with close family and friends morphed into a society event with 200 guests, many of whom Catherine barely knew. The final price tag came to $75,000, most of which came from my savings. "It's only money, Mom," Catherine said when I expressed concern about the cost. "This is the most important day of my life. Don't you want me to have the best?" I rationalized the expense as my final major financial gift to my daughter. After all, I had carefully saved and invested for decades. My retirement accounts held approximately $650,000 and my house was fully paid off. I had a modest pension from the accounting firm that covered my basic monthly expenses. I planned to travel during retirement and perhaps volunteer with a financial literacy program for underprivileged women, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for during my working years. The wedding was beautiful but felt more like a theatrical production than a heartfelt ceremony. I barely recognized my daughter in her designer gown as she focused more on impressing guests than experiencing the moment. Troy seemed pleased with the spectacle, treating the event like a business networking opportunity. By the end of the night, I felt emotionally and financially drained, but told myself it was worth it for Catherine's happiness. Little did I know that this extravagant wedding was just the beginning of a pattern that would eventually threaten everything I had worked for my entire life. The first real warning sign came 3 years after Catherine and Troy's wedding. They had purchased a house in an exclusive neighborhood with a mortgage that seemed well beyond their means. Their social media pages showcased lavish vacations and expensive cars, creating an image of success and affluence. I occasionally wondered how they afforded such a lifestyle on their salaries, but assumed Troy must be doing very well at his firm. One Sunday afternoon, they invited me over for brunch. The spread was impressive: champagne gourmet pastries and a private chef preparing omelets. As I sipped mimosas on their expansive patio overlooking professionally landscaped grounds, Catherine and Troy exchanged meaningful glances. "Mom, we need to talk to you about something." Catherine began, her voice taking on the smooth, persuasive tone she used when wanting something. "Troy has an amazing investment opportunity, but we need a little help with the initial capital." Troy jumped in, explaining a complex real estate venture that would supposedly yield 20% returns within 6 months. They needed $10,000 to secure their position before others snatched it up. "It's practically guaranteed money," he assured me. "We'd take out a loan, but that would mean higher interest rates eating into our profits. We thought of you first because we want to keep the opportunity in the family." Against my better judgment as an accountant who understood risk assessment, I agreed to the loan. Catherine promised they would repay me by Christmas with interest. When December came and went without repayment or even mention of the money, I gently reminded Catherine. "Oh, Mom, don't be so uptight about it," she laughed. "We're family, not business associates. The investment is still maturing. We'll pay you back when we can." That $10,000 was never repaid, and it established a dangerous precedent. Over the next 5 years, Catherine and Troy approached me with increasing frequency, always with urgent opportunities or unexpected expenses that required my financial assistance. The amounts escalated: $15,000 for Troy's business expansion, $20,000 when they needed to replace both cars, $30,000 for what Catherine vaguely described as investment diversification. Each time I expressed more concern, and each time my concerns were dismissed as unnecessary worry or lack of vision. I tried having serious conversations with Catherine about their spending habits, but she became defensive and accusatory. "You've become so stingy in your old age," she commented after I hesitated over a particularly large request. "It's not like you need all that retirement money right now. We're in our prime earning and investing years. This is when we need capital." I noticed their visits became less frequent unless they needed money. Catherine would call regularly when she wanted something, but went weeks without checking on me otherwise. Our conversations grew shorter and more superficial. Gone were the days of sharing meaningful experiences or seeking advice. Instead, I received carefully curated updates that painted their lives as increasingly successful despite the continuous need for financial assistance. Holiday gatherings became particularly tense. I dreaded the inevitable moment when conversation would turn to finances. One Thanksgiving, Troy spent the entire dinner detailing his latest business venture, a startup tech company that needed substantial investment. "Jean, this is the big one," he said, using my first name as he always did, lacking the warmth of calling me Mom despite 7 years of marriage to my daughter. "We're talking potential millions here. Early investors will receive preferential stock options. When I suggested they seek professional investors rather than family funds, the atmosphere chilled noticeably. Catherine barely spoke to me for the remainder of the evening, and they left immediately after dessert rather than staying overnight as planned. As their financial demands increased, my own financial situation became more precarious. Barbara Reynolds, my financial advisor for 15 years, requested an emergency meeting after I made another large withdrawal for Catherine and Troy. "Jean, I need to speak candidly with you," Barbara said, her glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed my accounts. "In the past 3 years, you've withdrawn nearly $150,000 in lump sums. At this rate, your retirement funds will be depleted long before you reach average life expectancy." Barbara showed me projections that sent a chill down my spine. If I continued this pattern of withdrawals, I would exhaust my savings by 72, potentially leaving me with 15 to 20 years of life with minimal income beyond my modest pension. "You need to establish clear boundaries," Barbara advised. "These aren't loans anymore, Jean. These are gifts that are compromising your financial security." I knew she was right, but the thought of confronting Catherine terrified me. What if setting boundaries meant losing my only child? The possibility of being cut off from my daughter and potential future grandchildren kept me compliant despite growing anxiety about my future. That night, I barely slept, tossing and turning as I contemplated my options. The next morning, I called and scheduled an appointment with Dr. Elaine Marshall, a therapist I had briefly seen after Richard's death. Over several sessions, Dr. Marshall helped me recognize the unhealthy patterns in my relationship with Catherine. "You're experiencing financial exploitation from family members," she explained gently. "It's a form of elder abuse even when it comes from those we love most." I recoiled at the term elder abuse, insisting that Catherine loved me but simply had different financial values. Dr. Marshall listened patiently before responding. "Love respects boundaries and considers the well-being of the other person. Ask yourself, are Catherine and Troy considering your long-term security and happiness when they make these demands?" The question haunted me for weeks as I noticed my health declining under the stress. My blood pressure, always normal throughout my life, now required medication. I developed insomnia and anxiety attacks, especially when checking my bank statements or receiving calls from Catherine. My closest friends began expressing concern. Susan Jenkins, my best friend since college, confronted me after I canceled our planned trip to Vancouver because I couldn't afford it, after sending Catherine another $20,000. "Jean, you're disappearing before my eyes," Susan said during our coffee date. "You've lost weight, you look exhausted, and you've given up activities you love because of money, yet Catherine and Troy are posting photos from their second vacation this year. Something is very wrong with this picture." I defended Catherine reflexively, but Susan's words resonated with a truth I had been avoiding. The daughter I raised, compassionate, thoughtful, appreciative, seemed to have been replaced by someone who viewed me primarily as a financial resource. The realization broke my heart, but I still couldn't summon the courage to establish the boundaries everyone urged me to create. Little did I know that the universe was about to force my hand in the most painful way imaginable. The evening that changed everything began ordinarily enough. I was preparing a simple dinner for myself, baked chicken with roasted vegetables, while listening to a mystery audiobook. The autumn sun was setting earlier these days, casting long shadows through my kitchen window. I had just set the table when the doorbell rang, followed by aggressive knocking that made my heart race. Through the peephole, I saw Catherine and Troy standing on my porch. This was unusual. They rarely visited without calling first, especially on a Tuesday evening. Catherine's face was tight with tension, and Troy paced behind her, checking his watch repeatedly. Something was clearly wrong. I opened the door, still wearing my apron. "Catherine, Troy, what a surprise. I was just about to have dinner. Would you like to join me?" "There's plenty." "We need to talk, Mom, now." Catherine pushed past me into the living room without waiting for an invitation. Troy followed his usual polished demeanor, replaced by agitation. Neither removed their coats, signaling this wouldn't be a long visit. I turned off the oven and joined them in the living room, where they remained standing rather than sitting. Catherine's designer purse lay open on my coffee table, and she pulled out a thick folder of documents. "Mom, we're in a situation," Catherine began, her voice clipped and businesslike. "Troy's latest venture had some unexpected complications. We need your help." Troy stepped forward, flipping through papers covered in financial terminology and red warning stamps. One of my investors pulled out at the last minute, leaving us exposed. If we don't cover this capital call by tomorrow, we stand to lose everything and potentially face legal action. My stomach tightened as I braced myself for what was coming next. How much are we talking about? Catherine and Troy exchanged glances before she stated flatly, $500,000. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. $500,000, nearly my entire retirement savings. I sank into my armchair legs, suddenly unable to support me. That's almost everything I have, I whispered. I need the money tomorrow. Catherine ordered, her voice so cold and unfamiliar it sent shivers down my spine. She wasn't asking, she was demanding. And no delays, Troy added, checking his expensive watch again. The bank opens at 9. We'll need a cashier's check by 10 at the latest. I stared at them, these strangers wearing my daughter's and son-in-law's faces. There wasn't a trace of shame or regret in their expressions, only entitlement and impatience. In that moment, something crystallized within me. The fog of maternal obligation and guilt that had clouded my judgment for years suddenly lifted, revealing the stark reality of my situation. I smiled and said, "Okay." My simple response seemed to catch them off guard. They had clearly expected resistance, prepared arguments, and emotional manipulation tactics. Instead, my apparent compliance left them momentarily speechless. Catherine recovered first, switching instantly from demanding to effusively grateful. "I knew you'd understand, Mom. This is a family emergency. We wouldn't ask if it wasn't absolutely necessary." Troy's posture relaxed as he launched into reassurances. "You'll be the first one paid back once we're through this temporary setback. In fact, I'll make sure you receive priority returns on the company's recovery." Their performance continued for another 15 minutes, a well-rehearsed good cop, bad cop routine designed to solidify my commitment. Catherine employed emotional manipulation, bringing up my grandchildren's future and suggesting their private school education and college funds would be jeopardized without my help. Do you really want Lily and Max to suffer because you wouldn't help their parents in a crisis? What would Dad say if he knew you had the means to help, but chose not to? Troy took a different approach, veiling threats beneath concerns for my welfare. "Jean, we're family. Family supports each other. If we go down financially, who do you think will take care of you in your final years? The state? Some impersonal nursing home? We're your future security." I nodded and made appropriate sympathetic noises, while my mind raced ahead, formulating a plan. With each manipulative statement, my resolve strengthened. Dr. Marshall's words echoed in my head, "Financial exploitation is a form of abuse." I was finally ready to acknowledge that truth. When tears failed to sway me further, Catherine switched tactics, becoming the dutiful daughter. "I'll come by early tomorrow to drive you to the bank. It'll be easier than you trying to handle this alone." "That's not necessary," I replied calmly. "I can manage just fine. I'll have everything ready." They left 40 minutes after arriving, satisfied they had secured their financial bailout. Catherine gave me a perfunctory hug at the door, already texting someone about their apparent success. Troy shook my hand firmly, his confidence fully restored, now that he believed his financial problems would be solved by morning. 9 a.m. sharp, Catherine reminded me as they walked to their luxury SUV. "We'll be counting on you." I watched them drive away, my half-prepared dinner, long forgotten. As their taillights disappeared around the corner, I leaned against the doorframe, my heart pounding. For just a moment, I allowed myself to feel the crushing weight of betrayal and loss. Then I straightened my shoulders, returned to the kitchen, and picked up my phone. The first call went to Barbara. "I need your help," I said when she answered. "And I need it tonight." The 4 hours following Catherine and Troy's departure were the most focused and purposeful of my life. Every minute counted in my hastily constructed escape plan. After hanging up with Barbara, who agreed to meet me at her office immediately despite the late hour, I began methodical preparations for disappearing from my own life. First, I packed a single medium-sized suitcase. Years of accounting had taught me to be organized, and practical skills that served me well in this crisis. I selected versatile clothing, essential toiletries, important documents, and a few irreplaceable mementos. Photos of Richard and Catherine from happier times. my wedding ring, and a small silver necklace my mother had given me. Everything else, I decided, was just stuff that could be replaced. While packing, I called Susan, my voice surprisingly steady as I explained the situation. "They've gone too far this time, Susan. I can't do this anymore." "Thank God," Susan replied without hesitation. "Where are you going? What can I do to help?" "The less you know right now, the better." I told her. "They'll pressure you for information. I need you to act surprised when they tell you I've disappeared." Susan promised to support my decision and maintain my privacy. As a final favor, she agreed to periodically check on my house and coordinate with a real estate agent if I later decided to sell it. With my suitcase packed and waiting by the door, I drove to meet Barbara at her office. The streets were nearly empty at 8 p.m., matching the hollow feeling in my chest. The financial advisor's building was dark except for the lights in her third-floor office. She buzzed me in immediately. "I've been worried something like this might happen," Barbara said, ushering me into her private office where papers were already laid out on her desk. "Here's what we need to do tonight to protect your assets." For the next 2 hours, we executed emergency financial maneuvers. Barbara helped me transfer the majority of my funds into secure accounts that would require in-person verification for withdrawals, something Catherine and Troy couldn't fake or force. We left just enough in my primary accounts to avoid immediate suspicion. "They'll likely try to claim power of attorney or some other emergency access," Barbara warned. "We need to prevent that." We prepared and signed documents appointing Barbara as my financial power of attorney, explicitly denying such authority to Catherine or any other family members. Barbara connected me with a lawyer friend who agreed to file the paperwork first thing in the morning, establishing legal protection before Catherine and Troy could take action. "What about your house?" Barbara asked as we finalized the paperwork. "I'm leaving it for now," I replied. "I can't deal with selling it immediately. Besides, emptying the house would alert them too soon." With my financial safeguards in place, I returned home around 10:30 p.m. to complete the final phase of my plan. Using cash withdrawn earlier, I booked a one-way ticket to Phoenix, Arizona, where my cousin Martha lived in Sedona. We hadn't been particularly close over the years, but she had always extended an open invitation to visit. I hoped that invitation would extend to a longer stay while I figured out my next steps. In my home office, I gathered financial records documenting every loan Catherine and Troy had requested over the years, totaling $220,000. None had been repaid, not even partially. I organized these documents chronologically, attaching bank statements showing the withdrawals and text messages promising repayment. The evidence of their systematic exploitation was undeniable when laid out this way. Next, I wrote a letter. The words flowed easily now that I had made my decision. "Dear Catherine, by the time you read this, I will be gone. After years of financial and emotional manipulation, last night's demand for $500, $1,000, forced me to acknowledge what I've been denying. Our relationship has become toxic and abusive. I have documented every loan you and Troy have taken from me, $220,000, that was never repaid despite promises. Each time you assured me it was the last time. Each time the amount increased. Last night's demand would have left me destitute in my old age. I raised you to be compassionate, honest, and responsible. The daughter who stands before me now bears little resemblance to the child I loved so dearly. At some point, you began to see me not as your mother, but as a financial resource to be exploited. This decision breaks my heart, but continuing as we have would break my spirit and leave me without means to support myself. I hope someday you will understand that walking away is the most painful act of love I've ever had to perform for both of us. The money you've already taken is yours to keep. Consider it payment for the privilege of not having to see disappointment in my eyes every time you look at me. With enduring love despite everything, Mom." I sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it in a small cardboard box, along with the financial records and one final item, a porcelain figurine of a mother and child that Catherine had given me for Mother's Day during her freshman year of college. I had treasured it as a symbol of our bond. Now I deliberately broke it in half, separating the mother figure from the child, and placed both pieces in the box at 1:30 a.m. I called a taxi to take me to the airport for my early morning flight. As I waited on the porch with my suitcase, I placed the box prominently by my front door, where Catherine would be sure to see it when she arrived in the morning. My house key lay on top, a silent statement that I wouldn't be returning. The taxi arrived exactly at 1:45 a.m. The driver, a middle-aged man named Walter, according to his license, helped me with my suitcase without asking questions about my early morning departure. As we pulled away from the curb, I resisted the urge to look back at the home where I had lived for 30 years, raised my daughter, mourned my husband, and finally found the courage to value myself. At the airport, I purchased a prepaid phone and turned off my regular cell phone, removing its battery to prevent tracking. The departure terminal was eerily quiet, populated only by a few business travelers and airport staff. I found a seat near my gate and waited, experiencing a strange mixture of grief, fear, and most surprisingly relief. When my flight was called at 4:20 a.m., I boarded with a sense of stepping into the unknown. As the plane took off, I watched the city lights recede below me, each one representing a life continuing unchanged while mine transformed completely. Somewhere down there was a house with a box by the door, a box that contained the remnants of a relationship that had once been the center of my world but had twisted into something I no longer recognized. By sunrise, I was halfway to Arizona, leaving behind not just my home and possessions, but the version of myself who had allowed love to become a weapon used against her. The woman who landed in Phoenix later that morning was someone new, someone who had finally found the courage to say, enough. I learned what happened after my departure through fragments of information gathered over months. The most immediate account came from my neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, who later sent an email to my new address once Susan deemed it safe to share limited contact information. According to Mrs. Calloway, Catherine and Troy arrived at my house promptly at 8:45 the next morning, dressed professionally as if for a business meeting. Catherine used her emergency key to enter when her knocking went unanswered. Mrs. Calloway, watering plants on her front porch, watched their confident entrance turn to confusion when they emerged just minutes later. "Where is she?" Troy demanded loudly enough for neighbors to hear. "Did she say anything to you about leaving?" Mrs. Calloway shook her head, genuinely unaware of my plans at that point. She watched as Catherine noticed the box by the door. They opened it right there in the driveway, their expressions transforming from confusion to shock as they examined its contents. Catherine read my letter, standing next to their SUV, her face draining of color. When she finished, she handed it to Troy, who scanned it quickly before crumpling it in his fist. What followed was a public meltdown that became neighborhood gossip for weeks. "You stupid, ungrateful bitch," Troy shouted toward my empty house. "After everything we've done for you." Catherine alternated between crying hysterically and calling my phone repeatedly, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that ranged from tearful pleas to return to angry accusations of abandonment and betrayal. Neither of them seemed aware or concerned about the spectacle they created as neighbors peeked through windows and blinds at the unfolding drama. Their next move was predictable. They began a systematic campaign to locate me. Catherine called every friend and acquaintance in my address book, fabricating concern about my mental health and well-being. "Mom left a disturbing note and disappeared," she would say. "We're worried she might harm herself. Please, if you've heard anything, you need to tell us immediately." Susan received multiple calls daily for weeks, each more insistent than the last. True to her promise, she maintained ignorance about my whereabouts while feeding me information about their escalating efforts. Troy even showed up at her house one evening, attempting to search her guest room when she let him use the bathroom, a violation that prompted Susan to threaten a restraining order. Their desperation took an official turn when Catherine filed a missing person report with the police. However, the detective assigned to the case quickly determined I had left voluntarily after reading my letter, which Catherine was forced to share. The detective also spoke with Barbara, who confirmed I had expressed fears about financial exploitation and had made deliberate plans to establish boundaries. The case was closed within days, much to Catherine and Troy's frustration. Their most aggressive action came 3 weeks after my departure when Troy attempted to access my retirement accounts. Barbara immediately contacted me through our secure email channel to report his efforts. "He came with a document claiming temporary guardianship due to your alleged mental incapacity," Barbara explained. "When I asked for court verification, he became belligerent and threatened legal action against both me personally and the firm. Fortunately, our paperwork was already filed and legally binding." The financial blockade led to their next predictable move, selling my personal belongings. Susan drove past my house one weekend to find them loading furniture and valuables into a rented truck. When she confronted them, Catherine claimed I had verbally promised these items to her before leaving. Susan took photos and immediately contacted the police, who stopped the unauthorized removal of property. While these external dramas played out, Catherine and Troy's personal and financial situation unraveled rapidly. Without my financial safety net, the precarious house of cards they had built collapsed. Troy's business venture failed completely within 2 months, forcing him to file for bankruptcy. The beautiful home they had showcased on social media entered foreclosure proceedings shortly after. Catherine's professional life suffered collateral damage from the financial stress. Her frequent absences and emotional instability at work led to her being placed on probation and eventually dismissed from her marketing position. Their marriage, already strained by financial pressure, began showing visible cracks. Susan reported overhearing a vicious argument between them in the grocery store, with Troy blaming Catherine for mishandling the golden goose. Throughout this period, I maintained strict radio silence, receiving information only through Susan and occasionally Martha, who had connections with mutual family members. It was difficult to hear about Catherine's struggles without reaching out, my maternal instincts warring with my newfound sense of self-preservation. In my darkest moments, I questioned my decision to leave so abruptly. During one such moment of doubt, I called Dr. Marshall from my new phone. "Am I a terrible mother for abandoning my child when she needed me?" I asked through tears. "Jean," she replied gently, "Catherine is 32 years old, not a helpless child. By removing yourself as their financial crutch, you're actually giving her the opportunity to develop resilience and self-sufficiency qualities you successfully developed when widowed. Sometimes love means allowing natural consequences to occur." Her words provided comfort, but the guilt lingered. I started a journal to process my complex emotions, filling pages with memories, regrets, anger, and grief. Through this therapeutic writing, I gradually came to terms with the painful truth: Catherine needed to experience the consequences of her choices without my intervention, if she ever hoped to grow into the person I knew she could be. 6 months after my departure, Susan shared what would be the last update I requested about their situation. For a long while, Catherine and Troy had separated. She had moved into a small apartment and found entry-level work at a local marketing agency. Troy had relocated to Chicago for a fresh start. The divorce proceedings had begun. This news allowed me to finally close a chapter and focus fully on building my new life, trusting that Catherine was finding her own path through the wilderness of consequences, just as I had found mine through the painful but necessary act of walking away. The morning after arriving in Arizona, I awoke in Martha's guest room, disoriented and exhausted. For a moment, I forgot where I was and why. Then reality crashed back. I had voluntarily become a refugee from my own life at 63. Martha, 10 years my junior and recently divorced herself, proved to be the perfect ally in my transition. She asked few questions, offered practical support, and gave me space to process my emotions. Her Adobe-style home on the outskirts of Sedona became my sanctuary for those first crucial weeks. "Stay as long as you need," she told me over coffee that first morning. "I know what it's like to start over." I spent the initial days in a fog of grief and anxiety, jumping whenever the phone rang and checking over my shoulder in the grocery store. Martha gently encouraged me to establish routines: morning walks along the red rock trails, afternoon readings on her shaded patio, evening cooking sessions, where we reconnected over family recipes. By week 3, I began considering longer-term arrangements. "I can't impose on you indefinitely," I told Martha as we watched the sunset paint the famous red rocks in brilliant orange and purple hues. "You're not imposing," she assured me, "but I understand needing your own space. My friend Linda has a guest cottage she rents monthly. It might be perfect while you figure out next steps." The cottage, a small adobe structure behind a main house in a quiet neighborhood, became my first independent home in my new life. With just one bedroom, a kitchenette, and a tiny living area, it was a fraction of the size of my previous home, but felt perfectly proportioned for my simplified existence. I furnished it minimally, with secondhand items, taking pleasure in creating a space defined solely by my own preferences. With my immediate housing secured and my finances safely managed by Barbara from afar, I turned my attention to establishing an income stream. While my protected retirement funds and pension provided basic support, I wanted purposeful work to structure my days and connect me to my new community. An advertisement in the local paper caught my attention: part-time bookkeeper needed for local artisan cooperative. Flexible hours. The position seemed tailor-made for my skills while offering the low profile I desired. I interviewed with Darlene, the cooperative's manager, presenting myself simply as a recent transplant from Oregon, looking for meaningful part-time work. Your qualifications are actually overqualified for what we need, Darlene said, after reviewing my resume, which I had edited to emphasize skills rather than specific employers that might be traceable. But if you're okay with the modest pay, we'd love to have someone with your expertise. The Artisan Cooperative became my gateway into Sedona's community. 3 mornings a week, I organized financial records, processed sales, and helped artists manage their business affairs. The work was straightforward compared to my corporate accounting career, but I found unexpected satisfaction in helping creative people navigate practical matters they often neglected. Word of my financial expertise spread quickly through Sedona's small business community. Soon, I was taking on additional clients, a family-owned restaurant, a wellness center, a tour guide service. Within 6 months, I had established a small accounting service specifically marketed to seniors and small business owners who needed straightforward financial guidance. While rebuilding my professional identity, I simultaneously worked on emotional healing. Finding Dr. Lillian Winters, a therapist specializing in family estrangement and late-life transitions, was a crucial step. Our weekly sessions became anchors in my recovery process. What you're experiencing is complicated grief, Dr. Winters explained during an early session. You've lost your daughter while she's still alive. That creates a unique form of mourning that lacks the closure of death. Through therapy, I began addressing not just the recent trauma of Catherine's betrayal, but older wounds as well, my tendency towards self-sacrifice difficulties, setting boundaries, and the unconscious patterns established in my own childhood that had influenced my parenting. I keep wondering where I went wrong with Catherine. I confessed during a particularly difficult session. What did I do to create someone who could treat her mother this way? Dr. Winters helped me understand the complex interplay of factors beyond my control. Catherine's personality, peer influences, societal pressures, and Troy's manipulative presence. Gradually, I learned to release some of the guilt I carried while acknowledging the areas where different choices might have fostered greater independence and responsibility in my daughter. Outside of work and therapy, I slowly expanded my social connections. At Martha's insistence, I attended a meeting of the Sedona New Beginnings group, women over 50 navigating major life transitions through divorce, widowhood, career changes, or family estrangements. In this circle of women with their own stories of reinvention, I found understanding without judgment. During one meeting, I finally shared my full story. The relief of speaking my truth without editing or apologizing was overwhelming. Rather than the condemnation I feared, I received validation and support from women who had faced their own difficult choices. "You didn't abandon your daughter," said Elaine, a silver-haired former professor who had become my closest friend. "You refused to enable destructive behavior. There's a world of difference between those things." Through New Beginnings, I discovered other community resources, volunteering opportunities, art classes, hiking groups. 6 months after arriving in Sedona as a shell-shocked refugee, I had developed a modest but meaningful life. I had clients who valued my expertise, a comfortable home environment, and budding friendships. Most importantly, I was sleeping through the night. Again, my anxiety medication reduced to occasional use rather than daily necessity. One unexpected joy came through discovering painting something I had never attempted during my structured, achievement-oriented previous life. At Elaine's encouragement, I joined a beginner's watercolor class at the community center. My first attempts were embarrassingly amateur, but the process of mixing colors and watching them blend on paper provided meditative calm, unlike anything I'd experienced. "You have a natural sense of color," my instructor commented during our third class. "Stop worrying about technical perfection and just enjoy the process." That permission to create imperfectly liberated something within me. I set up a small painting area in my cottage's living room where morning light streamed through the window. Each morning before work, I spent 30 minutes with my watercolors, gradually improving, but valuing the practice itself more than the results. As my first year in Sedona approached, I celebrated my personal growth by taking a solo trip to the Grand Canyon, something I had always wanted to do but had never prioritized. Standing at the rim, watching the interplay of light and shadow across the vast geological wonder, I felt a profound shift in perspective. My life had been carved out by forces both within and beyond my control, just like this magnificent canyon. The painful erosions had created something beautiful and enduring. For perhaps the first time, I fully embraced the woman I was becoming, rather than mourning the life I had left behind. That evening in my hotel room, I wrote in my journal, Today, I stood at the edge of one of nature's greatest transformations and recognized my own. The Jean who arrived in Sedona broken and afraid has been weathered into someone stronger, wiser, and unexpectedly happier. The greatest canyon in my life, the separation from Catherine, remains painful, but I can now see beauty in the separation itself. It created space for me to finally exist fully as myself. Little did I know that across the miles, Catherine was undergoing her own transformation, one that would eventually build a bridge across the chasm between us. The letter arrived through Susan almost 2 years after I left. She called one evening, her voice unusually hesitant. "Jean, I have something from Catherine. It came to my house with a note asking me to forward it to you if I could. I haven't opened it." My heart raced as I contemplated this unexpected contact. What did her note to you say? Just that she respects your privacy and doesn't expect a response but needed to say some things. She specifically promised she's not asking for money or trying to find your location. After a moment's consideration, I asked Susan to scan and email the sealed letter. 20 minutes later, I sat on my patio with a glass of wine staring at the printed pages with Catherine's familiar handwriting. "Dear Mom," it began simply. "I don't know if you'll ever read these words, but I need to write them anyway. First, I want you to know that I'm okay. I've been sober for 14 months now. Yes, that was part of the problem too, hidden from everyone, including Troy and you. The drinking started in college and escalated after marriage, helping me ignore the growing emptiness inside me as I chased external validation through possessions and appearances. After you left, everything fell apart. Troy and I divorced. I lost our house, my job, and what I thought was my identity. For months, I blamed you, convinced that a real mother would never abandon her child, regardless of circumstances. I was angry, hurt, and still in denial about my own responsibility. Rock bottom came when I was arrested for DUI last year. Sitting in that jail cell, I finally confronted the person I had become, entitled, manipulative, selfish. During court-mandated therapy and AA meetings, I began the painful process of taking inventory of my actions. You featured prominently in that moral accounting. "Mom, I am so deeply sorry for how I treated you. There are no excuses, only explanations I'm still working to understand. I manipulated your love and exploited your generosity. I placed material things above our relationship. I violated your trust repeatedly and showed no genuine remorse or responsibility. When you needed protection, I became the threat you needed protection from. I don't expect forgiveness, nor am I asking to re-enter your life. You deserved peace and freedom from what our relationship had become. I just wanted you to know that your departure, while painful, ultimately gave me the opportunity to confront myself honestly. In AA, we talk about making amends, but some harms can't be undone or repaid. The financial exploitation alone, I've calculated it at approximately $220,000 over 7 years, is a debt I acknowledge, but could never fully repay on my current salary. I've started over in a small apartment working an entry-level position at a marketing firm with ethical values. I'm building a modest life based on honesty and responsibility rather than image and acquisition. I attend therapy weekly and AA meetings daily. I'm learning to sit with discomfort rather than numbing it with alcohol or shopping. If you're wondering, I haven't heard from Troy in over a year. Last I knew, he was in Chicago, already remarried and still chasing get-rich-quick schemes. I see now how toxic our relationship was, how we enabled each other's worst qualities. I don't need to know where you are. I don't need a response. I just want you to know that I'm working every day to become someone different from the person who hurt you so deeply. Someone more like the mother who raised me with values I abandoned but am finding my way back to. If there's one thing, I hope you believe it's this: I love you, Mom. I always did, even when my actions showed otherwise. I'm grateful for every sacrifice you made that I took for granted. I hope you found peace and joy wherever you are. With love and profound regret, Catherine. I read the letter 3 times, emotions washing through me in waves: skepticism, hope, sadness, cautious optimism. Part of me wondered if this was another manipulation, but the tone felt different from anything I'd heard from Catherine in years. There were no demands, no expectations, no subtle pressure tactics. That night, I called Dr. Winters and read her the letter during an emergency phone session. "What do you think? Is this genuine, or am I being naive again?" "The content shows awareness and accountability without excuses," Dr. Winters observed. "The fact that she's not asking for contact information or immediate reconciliation suggests this isn't about getting something from you." After several days of reflection and discussions with both Dr. Winters and Elaine, I decided to respond cautiously. I wrote a brief letter that Susan could forward. Dear Catherine, thank you for your letter. I'm glad to hear you're addressing the underlying issues and building a healthier life. Your acknowledgement of what happened between us is an important step for both of us. I've created a new life that brings me peace and purpose. While I'm not ready for direct contact yet, I'm open to cautious communication through Susan if you're willing to respect my boundaries. My conditions for any future relationship are non-negotiable, complete honesty, no financial discussions ever, and respect for my privacy and independence. If these terms are acceptable to you, we can begin exchanging monthly letters. Despite everything, I've never stopped loving you either. Mom. Susan delivered my response and thus began a careful, measured reconciliation process. For 6 months, Catherine and I exchanged monthly letters through Susan. Her letters detailed her ongoing recovery therapy insights, modest achievements at work, and reflections on our past relationship from her new perspective. I shared carefully selected aspects of my new life, my watercolor hobby, the fulfillment of helping small business owners with their finances, the beauty of Sedona's landscapes while maintaining privacy about my exact location. The consistency and respectfulness of her communication gradually rebuilt a foundation of cautious trust. After 6 months of letters, I agreed to a phone call. Hearing Catherine's voice for the first time in nearly 3 years made my heart constrict. She sounded both familiar and different, more grounded, less artificially polished, with a new humility in her tone. Thank you for agreeing to talk, she said, her voice catching. I wasn't sure you ever would. I wasn't sure either, I admitted. But your letters have shown me you're doing the hard work of change. Our conversation lasted just 20 minutes, focusing mainly on immediate topics rather than our painful history. We ended with an agreement to talk again the following month. These monthly calls continued for another half year, gradually increasing in duration and depth as our comfort with each other grew. 9 months into our renewed communication, I made a monumental decision. I would meet Catherine in person. We arranged to meet at a restaurant in Flagstaff, Arizona, neutral territory, approximately halfway between our locations, though she still didn't know I lived in Sedona. Arriving at the restaurant 30 minutes early, I secured a corner table and ordered tea to calm my nerves. When Catherine walked in, I barely recognized her. Gone was the expensively maintained appearance, replaced by simple clothing and minimal makeup. She had cut her long hair into a practical bob that framed a face more mature but somehow more authentic than I remembered. Our eyes met across the restaurant, and for a moment we both froze. Then Catherine approached slowly, stopping a respectful distance from the table. Mom, she said simply, her eyes filling with tears. Catherine, I replied, standing. Neither of us moved for a long moment. Then, following an instinct I couldn't explain, I opened my arms. Catherine stepped forward tentatively, and we embraced for the first time in 3 years. The hug was brief and cautious, nothing like our old, easy affection, but it was a beginning. Over lunch, we navigated careful conversation, both aware of the fragility of our reconnection. Catherine brought a 1-year sobriety chip, which she placed on the table between us. I wanted you to see this. It's real. I showed her a small watercolor I had painted of Sedona's red rocks. I've discovered I'm an artist in my 60s. Who would have thought, by the end of our 2-hour meeting, we had established a new baseline, not the unconditional mother-daughter bond of the past, but not the toxic dynamic of our later years either. This was something new, a relationship between 2 adult women connected by blood and history, but now relating with boundaries and mutual respect. As we prepared to leave, Catherine handed me a sealed envelope. This isn't for now, she said. Open it when you get home. Later that evening, safely back in my cottage, I opened the envelope to find a check for $5,000 and a note. This is the first installment of many. It's not about buying forgiveness, it's about taking responsibility. I've set up an automatic monthly transfer from my account. Please accept this as part of my amends. With love, Catherine. The gesture moved me deeply, not for the money itself, but for what it represented: Catherine's commitment to backing her words with actions, her willingness to make concrete amends rather than empty promises. I deposited the check the next day. Over the following year, our relationship continued its careful rebuilding. Monthly in-person meetings became bi-weekly. I eventually shared my location in Sedona, and Catherine respected my space, visiting only when invited. True to her word, the monthly payments continued without fail, modest amounts that acknowledged the debt without straining her limited resources. During this period of reconciliation, I maintained the independent life I had built. I continued my accounting practice, my art classes, my friendships, and my solo adventures. The difference was that these aspects of my life no longer existed in opposition to my relationship with Catherine, but alongside it a healthy integration rather than an either-or proposition. 2 years after our first meeting in Flagstaff, I invited Catherine to visit my home in Sedona. Watching her take in my modest cottage with genuine appreciation rather than judgment confirmed how much she had changed. "It's beautiful, Mom," she said, examining my watercolors displayed on the walls. "It feels like you, peaceful and authentic." "That's exactly what I was going for," I replied, feeling a quiet pride in the life I had created from the ashes of betrayal. That evening, sitting on my patio watching the sunset paint the red rocks, Catherine asked the question that had likely been on her mind for years. "Do you think you'll ever completely forgive me?" I considered my answer carefully. Forgiveness isn't a single moment, Catherine. It's a process we're already engaged in. There are still moments when the hurt resurfaces, and that's okay. What matters is that we're both committed to a healthier relationship now. She nodded, accepting this complex truth rather than pushing for the absolute absolution her former self would have demanded. In that moment of mutual understanding, I recognized the full circle of our journey, the painful separation that had ultimately allowed both of us to become more authentic versions of ourselves. Today, I'm sitting in my sun-drenched art studio in Sedona, reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 5 years. At 68, I found a peace and purpose I never imagined possible during those dark days when I fled my former life with a single suitcase and a broken heart. My cottage has expanded to include a dedicated space for my watercolor paintings, which have gained modest recognition in local galleries. What began as therapy has evolved into a genuine artistic practice and secondary income stream. The walls around me showcase my evolution as an artist, from tentative early landscapes to more confident explorations of light and shadow in the unique Sedona environment. My accounting practice for seniors has grown to include workshops on financial independence and protection from exploitation. Twice monthly, I lead sessions at the community center, sharing practical strategies for safeguarding assets and recognizing warning signs of financial manipulation. The work feels like a meaningful way to transform my painful experience into protection for others. My relationship with Catherine continues its careful evolution. We maintain clear boundaries while enjoying a more authentic connection than we had for years before our separation. She visits quarterly, staying in a nearby hotel rather than with me, a boundary she respects without question. Between visits, we have weekly video calls and regular text exchanges about our daily lives. Catherine has remained sober for over 4 years now and has rebuilt her career ethically, recently receiving a promotion to marketing manager at her firm. She lives modestly in a small apartment, drives a used car, and continues therapy and AA meetings. The monthly payments toward her financial debt to me continue without fail, a concrete demonstration of her commitment to amends. Perhaps most significantly, Catherine has developed genuine relationships with my Sedona friends, particularly Elaine and Martha. Watching her interact respectfully with the people who supported me through my darkest days has been healing for both of us. She has created her own life and support system rather than trying to reclaim centrality in mine. Troy occasionally resurfaces in Catherine's life with financial schemes or emotionally manipulative overtures, but she has maintained firm boundaries with her ex-husband. Her ability to recognize and resist these tactics proves how far she has come in understanding the dynamics that once defined our relationship too. My decision to disappear that night 5 years ago remains the most difficult and courageous choice of my life. Walking away from everything familiar, my home, my community, my identity, as Catherine's ever-supportive mother, required a kind of bravery I didn't know I possessed. The journey since has taught me that sometimes the most profound act of love is setting boundaries that allow both parties to grow. Would I make the same decision again? Absolutely. That moment of crisis became the catalyst for transformation for both Catherine and me. My disappearance created space for her to confront her demons without the safety net of maternal bailouts. For me, it opened the door to self-discovery and joy I had deferred for decades while prioritizing everyone else's needs. The woman I am today, artist, business owner, mentor, friend, emerged from the painful cocoon of betrayal and loss. I've learned that it's never too late to reclaim your life, to establish boundaries, or to discover new passions. At 68, I feel more authentic and alive than I did at 40. If you're watching this and struggling with family relationships that have become exploitative or abusive, please know that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's essential. Financial manipulation from family members is a particularly insidious form of abuse because it weaponizes love and obligation. Recognizing it doesn't mean you've failed as a parent, spouse, or child. It means you're seeing reality clearly, perhaps for the first time. Have you experienced financial exploitation from family members? How did you address it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to support others sharing their journeys of recovery and reinvention. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away, not in anger, but in love for yourself and the person you're leaving behind. Thank you for listening to my story. May you find the courage to honor your worth and set the boundaries necessary for your peace and joy, no matter your age or circumstance.